Welcome to another episode of Real Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Proctor. Our sponsor is Leading Edge Financial Planning, and today we are joined by Dr. Paul Peloquin. He is the mad scientist over at ThumbScore. We've had David Thorne on the podcast before, and David and Paul work together. Paul works in the space of generative AI, behavioral finance, and do you just have one doctorate?
I have two doctorates.
He has two doctorates.
Yeah.
But it fits on one hand.
It does. It does.
I mean, we've got two hands.
And I got COVID madness and went back to school during COVID for a third, but I'm not going to complete it. I needed something to do. And I love to learn.
Yeah.
If you're not learning, you're dying.
Yeah.
So, it's my opinion.
Well, I agree. It just kind of reinvents the world as we go through it.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Yep.
But yeah, I love sitting in, even just kind of talking about what we're going to talk about with Dr. Paul. So I'll go through a little bit of the background. He's a CTO with over 25 years of experience in leadership and innovation in tech. Where did you just go for a conference for you to be a speaker?
In Barcelona.
Barcelona. Yeah, to talk about some really weird stuff with AI?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into, maybe touch on it, not go too deep, because we don't have all day to go on this, even though I'd love it.
Sure.
We don't have that much time. But it'll be a full podcast. So Paul, he began a study of computer science at University of Colorado. He went to FHSU, OCU, a doctorate from OCU, and AI, computer science. He's got a patent on detecting fraudulent video reviews.
Yep.
And he's developed tech for smart TVs, Apple Watch, Samsung wearables, Penn Mutual. I'm appointed with Penn. And did that happen to be with their algorithmic underwriting stuff?
No, we did some work in identifying like hot markets for them.
Okay. All right. So some cool science, finance, CIA, and of course now ThumbScore. Yep. You guys are doing some really cool stuff with behavioral finance and AI put together in, as far as I can describe it, bringing somewhat of a middle ground of not having a person there for, like when you do a huge rollout of enrollment of group benefits, there's a level of coaching that's happening through the artificial intelligence piece of it.
Correct.
Without having a person physically there. So you're multiplying what people would like to have as a person in front of them.
Yep.
In software, more or less.
Yeah, people spend somewhere between 17 and 30 minutes on their annual enrollment on making decisions that could affect their entire life.
Absolutely.
And when my daughter, Kateri, first had her first full-time job, and she's like, Dad, I don't know what to pick. And her situation was quite unique because of some health challenges she has. I'm like, you know what? I could do this with some AI just to help people like Kateri. And that's where kind of ThumbScore was born.
Cool. And ThumbScore is not your only involvement. You've got quite a few different things, which I guess I'll just get out of the way and we can talk. But we'll start with talking a little bit about AI, what it is, how it impacts our lives. Then we'll get into the typical, what we talk about with wisdom that you've picked up along the way in your career, and hopefully some of the things we can glean from that, and then get into what does living the best life possible look like for Dr. Peloquin. Maybe it's a third doctorate. Who knows? I'm excited to learn what that might be. Okay. So why don't you just dump the truck on AI in terms I can understand?
Okay. So, where people have been talking about AI for a long time. AI got some of its first traction in trying to recognize characters. Like this is a 1, this is an A, this is a B, through computer vision, or through a robot trying to navigate its way around a room. These are the kind of the infancy narrative of AI. We've seen the advent of generative models, and I consult for some companies on generative models, and we have our own company that utilizes this stuff. And I think like there's ChatGPT, there's Otter, there's all these kind of generative models out there, and people are worried about them, people are excited about them, I know when ChatGPT 3.5 dropped and I was playing with it, and I'm like, you know what? Because my wife's an English teacher. And I said, watch this. And I gave her some prompts that she had her students write. And she's like, oh, man. And so, like, I emailed the principal of my son's high school, like, are you aware of this? She forwarded it up to the assistant superintendent. My son, who teaches, well, he taught at a high school and at a seminary in Denver, brought that. And everybody took a different approach on what to do about this stuff. And so I, of course, think it's really exciting what's happening, but I find that most people have a misunderstanding on what generative AI is and what it's not. And I could kind of go into that a little bit if you'd like.
Let's get the 101.
All right. So a lot of your users are probably familiar with Excel. Okay. So let's imagine we're, for some reason, trying to have a database or an Excel spreadsheet on what type of pet the various children in this daycare have. So Susie might have a dog, Patrick might have a cat, and Ryan might have a turtle. And we have data on 75% of the students, and they're, for some reason, all dogs, cats, and turtles. And if we asked, what pet does Tom have? And there's nothing in that cell or in the data column in the database for Tom, a traditional database would say unknown, like there's nothing there. A generative model might say, depending on the amount of cats, dogs, and turtles, might say, he's got a dog. And I'm 60% sure about that, but see, like ChatGPT doesn't say I'm 60% sure about that. And I'm 39% sure that he's got a cat and 1% sure that he has a turtle. Generative model are statistical models. They're taking guesses on the next word given the previous words. And so it's not getting at truth, it's getting at probabilities. And a lot of times people approach ChatGPT and ask it, a question and get the answer back, and it's really confident, right? It's got this confidence about it on what is true, but really it's just giving you percentages. And if you can imagine the word that it chooses as a bucket of marbles, okay? And there's each word that it could choose are represented by a color of marble in the bucket, and it's shaken up, okay? So all the percentage, like all the different marbles will mix together, but if it's really likely that the word before car was red, like the red car, then there's gonna be more red marbles. Probably not gonna pick out a chartreuse model. And so it's all about probabilities, and that is what generative AI is. The reason it seems so magical is because it's trained with what's called an attention mechanism. And an attention mechanism, you can kind of imagine it as when you read a book, where are your eyes looking? They're looking at the word you're focused on, like your attention is on that word. But your brain kind of remembers the words that came before it, and you process context. So, when I hear Susie, I know that's the main character because Susie was introduced in chapter 1. And that is what generative models do. They use this attention mechanism to give probabilities to what the next word is given the previous word. And that's really what generative models do. They are not truth finders. There is ChatGPT 4 was, they tested it. I think it's called Truthful AQ. I can't remember exactly the title of it. But there's this data set where it asks hard questions to get answers. And you can test the truthfulness of a model based on this benchmark that's been set, okay? And it's around the 60% mark, which means it's getting it wrong 40% of the time. And so that is one mistake that people make using these generative models if you're not aware that it's just giving probabilities. It also, there's a reason now that ChatGPT doesn't give citations anymore, because generative models are really bad about figuring out where that learning came from.
Oh.
A lot of people don't realize this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a black box. These neural networks, which is the backbone of these generative models, there is some science going in to try to understand why these, what is in the black box, but it's really still a black box. And so it can't give with any confidence where that knowledge came from. And that's a problem with generative modeling. And also, you know, there's a debate. Was ChatGPT trained on leftist views, rightist views? And then you have the problem of, let's say, in scientific articles, right? Scientific articles are peer reviewed, but it can be shown statistically 80% of them are wrong. That would take a whole podcast for me to run the math for you, but a lot of them are wrong. But this is what's forming the basis of some of the language truth behind these things. So you really have to understand, what is my use case for the generative model? And given that, is this an appropriate use of it? Because if you're looking for truth, it's probably not. If you're looking to brainstorm, it's a great tool. And there's lots of ways it's a great tool or not a good tool. So it's not like looking up a database. And the other really big, there's a lot of big problems with generative models, but you know, ChatGPT was trained in 2021 on, I think 4 has 5 billion possible parameters. Think of a parameter like as a word. But it took over $100 million to train that thing. We don't know the exact amount, or maybe we do, I don't know. And with that in mind, training it again on new data costs a lot of money. And so these models, there's some tricks they're trying now to get it more up to date, but you're always going to be a little behind the times. So that's in general how these generative models work. They're not truth tables, they're probabilities.
All right. And so I'm really curious about the behavioral finance side and what some of the stuff you guys are doing with it on helping to educate, inform, quickly meet somebody where they're at on their decision making. So if you wouldn't mind just speaking to that, how does behavioral finance and artificial intelligence connect?
Sure. One of the professors we work with on this, I'm kind of like the jack of all trades. I'm always learning, but we like to bring in really good experts to help. And likes to say all the time, the number one thing you can count on people to do is nothing, particularly when it comes to financial wellness. I also have a physics background, and you can think of it about the inertia, right? A body at rest, depending on how much mass is in the body, maybe friction against it and pushing it. Sometimes if there's a lot of inertia there, keeping it in place, pushing that object to get somebody to, like if you can imagine a person, getting them to just where they can make a real choice is pretty hard. Because it's like, oh, it's in the future. You know, and if you keep saying with your personal finances, it's in the future, 30 years from now, you've lost all the benefit of compound interest. And so the challenge we use is, or the challenge we had is, how can we get a person just to be able to make a real choice, to overcome these irrational behavioral tendencies? It's not any fault of the person. It's just the state of being that we deal with as humans. And how can you move them to where they can make a real choice? And so what we do is we combine the data of, you know, recommendations by some of the best financial advisors in the country, what they would say for a person given this context. What is a context? Given this person's Well, we have a survey we do. It's a 90-second assessment. But given a person's current state, and I use data science to correlate, given these questions, what can I really infer about this person? And then we use that to just try to get them to where they can make a choice using behavioral economic principles that have been studied in labs. And then that's kind of the training data we use with artificial intelligence. So we don't want to force a choice. See, that would be, in my opinion,
Control.
But we want to overcome that initial hesitancy, that irrationalness, to where, okay, now I can make a real choice about this. For example, a lot of the younger generation doesn't understand what life insurance is, or doesn't understand the basic cost of life insurance. They think they take these surveys and they think it's like way more expensive than it is. And so how do we educate them in such a way to, number one, really understand, is it valuable to them or not? It's not necessarily valuable to all of them, but is it? And then if so, what's the real cost? And just getting the people to be cognitive of that and then give them a choice. Also, disability insurance, for example, the chances of long-term disability where they'll knock you out for 9 months or more is significant for a person during their work life. You know?
Yeah. And especially in an age where, oh man, it's a vast majority of Americans are more or less paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah. And so one disability can wipe you out.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand this is my real risk.
And not just wipe you out, make you potentially housing unstable.
Yes.
Displace. I mean, then you trigger all these other compounding life events on top of that, and it can get ugly fast.
Yeah. So that's another thing we've studied a lot is how do you help somebody really understand their current state and what they could really afford and how to hedge against that, that possibility.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's important because it's hard to be an advisor. So I used to work for a company that was primarily insurance oriented, and it is an important topic to cover because of what we just mentioned, but it's also hard not to come across as a fearmonger.
Yes.
Of you need to buy this product to take care of that, and it might not happen. We hope it doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, I'm making a sale, getting a commission to convey this to you. And so there's just a lot of crossed wires in that process of helping somebody understand.
Yep.
And that's part of what I really like about what you guys are doing is helping them see reality, make a sober-minded decision of whether they keep or pass that risk along to somebody else.
Exactly. You don't, and part of the generative side of it is you don't want to, like what person A, what might get them to where they can make a good choice may be different than person B given life circumstance. And so how do you in real time morph that? And that's something where AI helps us.
Nice. So has there ever been a time you've been stuck on a decision and you go back to the modeling to get through the decision?
I do. I use what I've invented all the time.
Okay, I'm not trying to get proprietary information out here on the podcast, but I'll use an example. My father-in-law recently needed care, and it was just hard for my mother-in-law to actually make a decision on when the caregivers would show up.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's not just one decision because there's limited resources there.
Yep.
When's the right time to show up? What are they going to do when they're there? Why is it the right time for them to show up? Can I do that? Maybe I should.
Yeah.
And so and all of those decisions are emotionally charged. And that was the case then. That's the case with most people with their finances is they're very emotionally charged because it may be, I think this might be a good way to go, but my spouse or my partner might not agree with it and might need, they have their own parameters. And so we got to feel, that's a lot of energy.
Yes.
And I got to pick the kids up from school and get them to soccer and get dinner on the table. And we've got this other thing coming up for the weekend. And that's the environment we're trying to make decisions in.
Yep. It's really hard.
It's super hard.
Like obviously we're big believers in getting a certified financial planner. ThumbScore can take care of some of these employee benefit questions, but there are big questions outside of it that, I'm sorry, a computer's never going to be able to do. So,
And I'm happy to know that too, because a computer is going to have a really tough time sorting through what your values are,
yes,
what your top life priorities are, and also something comes and rattles your cage, then what? The realities of some decisions are really tough, especially when we're talking about decisions that have to do with finances, which are inextricably connected with our, how we work out our purpose in life.
Yep.
Because not much happens without being able to pay a bill or put food on the table or put gas in your car, let alone put money back for future life events. And that level of existence cuts clear down in ourselves to our core, like, formative framework. Yeah. Like, and that stuff's formed when we're kids. And so that's why a lot of the times when we're sitting here doing financial planning and we get closer and closer and closer to why people care about money, it touches on therapy in different ways.
Yeah, sure.
So, but yeah, let's get back to talking a little more about your area of expertise and that's kind of it, is behavioral finance. What are some interesting findings you've come across in the world of behavioral finance?
Interesting findings. I guess I'm generally often shocked about what moves the needle. And when we say move the needle, is getting the person out of the position of doing nothing, or at least considering doing something, which is something you can keep track of within certain software, because how much time did this person spend reflecting on this issue? Was it just the next button, or did they actually try to process and then come to the decision, you know what, we're not going to do anything, or we are going to do something? I guess it's not a shocking finding, but using some behavioral science techniques can really help a person. Okay, if they've not elected before, let's say maybe elected to do an emergency savings account, or elected to get disability coverage. So they go from not electing to electing, as opposed to a person who has elected before and now elects more, or gets closer to what they really need. So let's say what they really need is $4,000 of some sort of coverage, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Okay. What we have found, we think, we're still looking at some data, but is that sometimes it's easier to get the person who has never elected closer to the goal than it is the person who has elected before to elect closer to the goal, which seems really odd to me, that a person would like jump in both feet first and elect something using certain techniques, as opposed to we just needed to move the dial $400. Mm-hmm. So we call it the coverage delta, old coverage, new coverage, you know that. Okay. And we're finding some very interesting things about that.
And you don't have to totally lay it all out there, but behavioral finance is such a knucklehead. I mean, like because this has been part of my own growth. I used to get really frustrated when I'm like, hey, I just laid out a scenario where everything goes away if we don't at least have these couple of things in place. Mm-hmm. Like, and that's not too hard to do.
Sure.
But like, you said it makes sense. And then like getting him to actually do something with it was really hard. And I'm coming at it from a, which one is the logical, left brain. I'm left brain in it really hard, not connecting emotionally to what might be there blocking them from taking action. Because mm-hmm. there could be a million things that are getting in the way of actually executing on what they need.
And 9 times out of 10, it's not a logical reason.
Right.
And so that's where the challenge is. And it's nothing against us. We make a lot of, that's one of the problems with like macroeconomics, right? It assumes logical decision making, but at a micro level, a lot of decision making with finance is not logical. It's emotional, or it's based on a billion things you can't see. So
Yeah. So my wife Stephanie and I went to the No Hope World Conference. It's actually it's for therapists and counselors and psychiatrists, and like Dr. Kurt Thompson and some of the big personalities you'd see in the therapy or psychiatry space were out there. It was really great. One of the takeaways I had, which wasn't like earth shattering, but 90% of what's going on up here in our brain space is subconscious.
yep.
Like, so it's like all this stuff's getting pushed into AI that it's kind of filtering through to come up with what makes the most sense. But like for us, we have all this wiring that we're not even that aware of. That's helping us make these decisions. And it may come from something that didn't get straightened out a long time ago that we've never really dealt with, that all our neurons kind of formed around a certain way. And,
Yep.
and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. It's a fascinating space to be in. Like, I'm constantly fascinated by stuff we figure out and find out.
Yeah, it is. And look, it's hard to be a human. Why isn't it easier? It's really hard.
Life is messy. Life is messy, indeed.
It is. Okay, let's think about what else would be. Let's talk about how AI might impact us, and also, I guess I'll give you the choice of, you want to talk about how life might impact us moving forward, or the should we question.
Let's talk about the should we question. It's interesting. I think there was and I don't remember the exact figures, but at one point last year or this year, a number of the CEOs of tech companies were surveyed as like, should you regulate AI? I think something like 70% said, yes, regulate us. They asked academia the same question. It was considerably less. Like, no, you don't need to regulate us. We'll self-regulate. But you will find in papers and conferences you could watch on YouTube and all sorts of things that the kind of questions that are being posed, it makes me wonder, like, should we be even asking those questions? Like, what is the benefit in pursuing that from just basic human dignity standpoint?
Yeah.
You have the writers striking, and out in Hollywood right now, and one big part of that is AI, right? They're worried about losing jobs over this, or at least that's one of the concerns. And work is basic to human dignity. If people want to work from the beginning, we don't want to work to where work is our life, but having a purpose sometimes is very much tied up in a person's ability to work. So the more we take humans out of the equation, what are we doing with human dignity? And that's a question that's on my mind a lot with AI.
Right. And a recent film is kind of a big hit, was Oppenheimer. Let's talk about that decision-making model compared to where we're at today.
Yeah. So with Oppenheimer, was in this nuclear race in the middle of a war, in the middle of, the survival of basic human existence in a way, and trying to triumph against evil. So got the nuclear bomb, but then spent the rest of his life trying to stop nuclear proliferation. So that was a really hard decision, right, for those scientists. And we're kind of in the same space. We're not in the middle of a world war per se, but we still have scientists who are pursuing these various AI initiatives that could have some drastic consequences for human dignity, or just the more you automate something, you better know how the automation works. And, do we want AI making life or death decisions? These are questions we have to ask and try to come to a good answer about sooner rather than later. And that's the big challenge, is this technology is moving so fast. We can't even really have time to pause, breathe, and reflect on it. And so that's a real challenge right now.
Yeah. And I could, just thinking about this, I could foresee a space where, okay, we've got geopolitical issues where the U.S., we've got our military piece of it, but the U.S. government isn't directly in business. There are governments that are.
Correct.
That are, competing with the U.S., where if the government and essentially the country as a whole that has a communal orientation, they really harness this without abandon, not worrying about all the consequences, but they seriously leverage it from a top-down perspective, and then they get to piece up who gets what within their country, within their society, talking about human dignity, but also even just from a productivity standpoint, it could surpass what private industry does all by itself.
For sure.
I mean, there's a lot of potential outcomes that can get that I can see how messy that could get for everybody.
For sure. Yeah, anytime you have a totalitarian regime, if you can do information filtering, all these things, you can control your society and do some various dangerous things from my perspective, from the perspective of democracy. Yeah.
And when you introduce AI and kind of the Musk way of the machine building the machine, but the government building the society at this kind of a rate.
Yep. Yeah. So there are very real things we're dealing with right now, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Just hard to even filter through all the thoughts that creates.
For sure.
What other thoughts might you have on the average consumer who's trying to figure out, okay, what does AI mean on a very practical level?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes I close my eyes to think. It's just a habit. I'm very visual, so I like to whiteboard stuff. So I think maybe there's a two-part answer. One, there's these consumers or friends of mine who are very afraid of AI in terms of, it's going to be sentient and we're going to have like Terminator and these things. And that comes from I think a fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is. AI is just probabilities. Okay, that's really all it is. It's doing really cool things with probabilities, but AI is just probabilities. So it's like you have the soundboard in front of you, okay? And imagine the answer to the question, you were asking a question, and AI, to some degree, is tuning the board in order to get the right answer.
Okay.
And in these neural networks, you're just tuning these various nodes in order to find pattern matching. It's like if A, then B, if B, then C, okay? So you don't need to worry about sentience, but you do need to worry about perhaps control. You need to just be aware in the space you are in. I think it's funny, YouTube now, like I don't have my history turned on for YouTube in it. They used to still recommend videos based on what I put in my watch library, but now they don't recommend any videos now. And they say, turn on your search history. Huh. And I'm just refusing. Yeah. But they're using a certain kind of behavioral technique that I happen to know about in order to get me to do that because I'm annoyed with how it looks on my screen. Mm-hmm. And so I think being aware of these kind of things, there's another behavioral technique where maybe there's two buttons. Sometimes you add a third option, and adding the third option actually creates more movement by consumers simply because there's a third option. It's weird, but true. And you see it all the time over the internet. So I think the average consumer should just be aware that AI is being used all the time, and just to be, take a pause and self-reflection. Is this really something I want to be doing? Asking that question, I think, is a good question.
Yeah. Do you have time for one more question before
Sure.
we take a short break?
Yeah.
Okay. What about I was using AI software, and I use it for note taking, and then I asked it to essentially turn the bullet points of my notes into a sea shanty.
Okay.
And it said, I don't know about a sea shanty. And then I asked a follow-up question, kind of challenging it. And I felt like I shamed the software into doing what I wanted it to do. What's that all about? If it's not sentient, what is that?
Sure. Again, it's all about what's called the input buffer. Okay.
All right.
Or input context, or there's different ways to call it. So in these generative AI models, it's aware of certain amount of inputs. Okay. So on like ChatGPT, for example, you ask a question, it'll give you an answer. It can, to a certain degree, if you ask another question, it has in its input buffer the question you asked before. And so that becomes part of the context.
Okay.
And so the fact that you asked it to do a sea shanty and said no, there is something in this black box. For some reason, you don't like sea shanties are bad. Okay.
Oh, okay.
But now that you reinforce that you actually want it to do it, then the fact that your motivation was yes was enough to move the weights of the input buffer over the no. That's all it was.
So funny.
But it seems like you shamed it.
Yeah.
But it's
I was
real.
like, that's scary.
It's really just moving the dial slightly.
Okay.
That's it. But because of the way they respond, because there's all these billion of data endpoints, though even probably the way it did it made it feel like it was shamed, because it would it did something that is similar to shaming me, so I need to respond in kind. But it's not consciousness, it's simply moving the input buffer dials.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, well, doesn't, something like, don't you like sea shanties or something like that? It's like, well, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow,
Like
so weird.
something my kids' friends did. We're like, what's 2 + 2? 4. What's 2 + No, it's 5. And eventually they got the computer to say it's 5. Just because for some reason, okay, well, I'm only going to argue with you up to X steps.
Sure.
And then I'll change. And that's what the context suggested.
Interesting. Okay. We're going to take a real short break.
All right.
We'll be right back. And we are back with the Mad Wizard as it pertains to AI and behavioral finance and all kinds of fun stuff with Dr. Paul Peloquin. Let's get into the other part of this where let's talk about your career.
Okay.
What has led you to be where you're at? And I'm curious to hear what kind of pieces of wisdom you've picked up along the way.
Sure. I got interested in computers when I was very young. I wanted the Atari gaming system. Okay, my friends had these cool Atari gaming systems, and I wanted one. And so for Christmas, I opened this box. It said Atari on it, but it looked really weird. I'm like, Dad, this isn't the Atari my friends have. He's like, no, but let me show you something. And what it had was a keyboard with it. And he hooked it up to the TV, and he just looped my name over and over on the TV screen with basic programming. I didn't even know what programming was. I was a very young kid. But that hooked me that day. Like, I'm manipulating my television.
Wow. Yeah.
So early on, I mean, since that time, I've been programming as part of my career or for fun. When I was in high school, I developed a program to teach Latin. It's like, why would you learn a dead language? I don't know. It sounded interesting. So I did a choose your own adventure on a computer to teach kids Latin. And that won a national award and was actually used in schools across the country.
Wow. At what age?
I was in high school. I think I was 16.
Wow. Amazing.
I was mostly self-taught. I did study computer science at the University of Colorado, but what I really liked about science was the logic behind it. I was fascinated by logic and became an expert in what's called mathematical logic, and that's basically the mathematical representation of reasoning. And that's the precursor to AI. And so that's what I studied. And I think one of the things going forward, one way to make tools like ChatGPT better would be to combine it with what's called probabilistic mathematical first order logic. Basically put reasoning into the equation. And I'm just fascinated by those things. Talk about wisdom learned along the way.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned from the hard way twice was having bad partners. You need to surround yourself with people who are, number one, can challenge you, like aren't yes people, yes men, yes women, but that can challenge you, but also have understand what is valuable to you ethically and morally. I think you need to be compatible in that way with those people you work most closely with, at least I have found. And being humble, so being able to say, that's not my expertise, finding the person whose expertise it is. I know with ThumbScore, we're all very different from each other, like very different. But for some reason, and I'll say it's God's providence, put us together in a way we work very well together. And so it took me a couple lessons to learn that, but once I learned it, it's like it stuck. And, God has blessed that. The other wisdom that I have learned, and I have like a life coach who helped me understand what I was learning was, look, where you need to find your area of genius. And then you have your area of excellence, your areas of competence, and your areas you're just not good at. And you need to make time for your area of genius, where you can just explore what you're a genius at. Everybody's a genius at something. And so I make sure to put in my schedule time for me to play on things that aren't relevant to what I'm necessarily doing at work. I'm just being the mad wizard, as it were. And a lot of the tools we use have come about, might be a couple years later, but from things I've played with.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, whoever you are, to allocate time for that, even though you don't have time for it. And the last big wisdom I think I've learned along the way, at least for me personally, and maybe I'm just wired this way, but if I am not learning something new, I'm not as good at my job, even if it's completely unrelated. So I try to dedicate a lot. I dedicate between 6 to 12 hours a week in learning something completely different from what I know. And that has increased my efficiency on my work, oddly enough. There's a correlation there.
Yeah.
So
Tell me about how different. You say completely different. How different?
Well, so I do a lot of, some of my time right now I have spent studying comedy.
Okay.
And
I saw a comment of dad jokes in and you're an amateur stand-up comedian. Is that just to your kids or to other people?
If I go to other states, one of my hobbies is to go do a 5-minute set at one of the open mic nights I can find.
Okay.
And I study the science of humor.
All right.
So I study some of the greats like Adam Sandler and Steve Martin. What makes something funny? What makes something not funny? I'm actually writing a book right now on, the working title is And Jesus Laughed, how to use humor in evangelizing the world.
Are you going head to head with Bob Goff here?
I don't know who Bob Goff here is.
Oh, you don't know?
No.
No, it's not Bob. Just Bob Goff.
Okay.
Okay. You might appreciate his writings. He's hilarious.
Okay.
And he's a believer.
Well, awesome.
Sorry.
So yeah, I do that. I spend a lot of time in theology and studying not just the scriptures, but some of the great theologians of the ages. And I had times when I wasn't doing that, and I'm a data guy. Okay, so I track my efficiency. I track these things. I'm just weird like that. And I noticed I'm crazy more efficient when I'm working on other things too. So
Yeah. Is that across the board, or is that just with your personality type?
it's me. I don't know if it's
So it's
like
you.
universally applied, but I will say, I just have a data set of like my coworkers and my family, right? And I do see that more than just me. I see it with my kids.
Okay.
I see it with my coworkers when they're engaged in learning something new. For some reason, like you study dementia,
Yeah.
and you see massive degradation once people retire because they're always doing something comfortable and safe.
Yeah.
But for people who are learning something new when they retire, something out of their comfort zone, the rate of dementia is not just lower, but much lower. So I do think there is something in our brains where if we're learning something new, that it gets those neurons firing enough to make you good at what you're also working on for work.
Right. Yeah. And intuitively, it makes a lot of sense. It's like if you're going to sit in a chair all day and not do anything, your muscles are going to atrophy.
Yep,
If your brain's not working, it's going to atrophy.
yep. So that's one piece of wisdom that I learned something new. Keep something challenging yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. My brain naturally switches channels quickly. Some people see that as a disorder. Sometimes it's inconvenient. But it is interesting because as I dabble in different things, whether it's smoking meat or making wine, or
Sure.
before I discovered I had a serious gluten intolerance, I used to brew my own beer. But I would learn so much.
Right.
And then it's like you stumble across other ways it connects to different areas of your life. You're like, well, okay, that's kind of cool. Yeah, so that is interesting. Maybe that's one of those things that I've experienced. I've benefited from it without realizing that's part of what was driving it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't consciously do this,
Yeah.
but my life coach, spiritual director, whatever you want to call her, she started over the years going, you know what? Here's what I'm seeing. And as I leaned into that, I'm like, oh yeah, this is very true for me.
That's cool. Let's talk about that. Life coach.
Uh-huh.
How long have you had this life coach?
3 years, I think,
Okay, how long have you had a life coach?
the same time.
Okay, so this is new, relatively
Yeah,
new.
yeah. And I took a break for part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How has that impacted your life?
Significantly, really just having this third party perspective. Now, this person is a believer in Christ and so shares my moral and ethical values. That was important to me. But just having this third party, number one, it brought accountability, but also this person has significant training in different things and brought some additional approaches to challenges. And I could definitely say it's helped me move the needle in certain areas of my life as a father, as a husband, I do ministry. So, yeah, it's one of the, not cheap either, but it's one of my best investments, honestly.
Okay. Yeah. Objectivity is worth so much.
Yes. Somebody who's willing to tell you how it is.
Yeah. We're so blind to our blind spots. I know that's going to sound like a circular statement, but it's a blind spot.
Yep.
You can't see it.
That's why it's a blind spot.
That's why it's a blind spot. And I don't want to believe it for myself. But man, yesterday my brain got fried out sitting here with my marketing strategist person of like, she's talking a language that is not my wheelhouse.
Sure.
And by the end of the session, I was like, I was having a repeat about every other thing twice because my brain couldn't hold anymore.
Sure.
That's my blind spot. That is my just critical area of weakness when it comes to the world of business, of the 8 different domains of competency for any business. That's my blind spot.
Sure.
And, but I don't want to believe I have a blind spot. People don't like believing they have blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Has that been the best way to find out your blind spots and go exploring to move the needle?
It's one of the ways, yeah. I'm also part of a men's group, and to some degree, we're real authentic with each other. They're also friends, and so, you don't want your friend to always think bad of you, so you don't necessarily always lay it out there, to be honest, and I know we do that. But with her, man, I tell it like it is, and I have confidence. She keeps it confidential,
Of course.
And some of the stuff she's told me to do, she's like, no, you go apologize to that person today.
Yeah.
And you come tell me after you've done it. I mean,
That's
it's just,
awesome.
but it's good for me.
That's
Because
awesome.
I wouldn't even realize. And then she's like, and I'm like, oh, wow, I did that. Okay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
Sounds like a very valuable person.
indeed. Yeah.
Okay. So Dr. Kurt Thompson's a really big guy in the space of, we'll say, Christian psychotherapy, therapy, and neuroscience. So he's got a podcast. I knew about his one before. It was Being Known podcast, but he's got another one he started that's it's called Neurofaith, Neuro Faith. And the one I listened to today was really cool. And it was, but yeah, it's these psychiatrists who, I mean, they're basically brain doctors talking about how faith connects with that and how those come together. I had a thought and I lost it.
That's all right.
So he gets, so he's written and he's working on this concept called a confessional community, where the model is you bring together the pure form of it is he tried to bring people, he brought people together who had, as far as they could tell, no connections.
Okay.
Invariably, connections kind of arise. If
Sure.
you're in the same community, you're going to wind up realizing
Yeah.
there's some connection somehow. But what happens is that person, all they bring into the room is themselves, except they bring everything.
Yeah.
Because when you and I are in the room, it's me and my wife and my kids and my family and all the history, good and bad, of all that is what I'm bringing, and that's what you're bringing. And so in this confessional community, it's confidential, and the design of it is that nobody knows each other or has any conflicts or connections, because what happens is our problems wind up working themselves out. And this is not this is not AI. But going back to your just the conversation on that kind of a community, but like it's amazing to like for these people to experience the rupture of a relationship within this group. They don't have anything outside of it, but there's still rupture happening in the group because they're there and we're here.
Makes sense.
So we bring our problems and then they work it out together. But it's so interesting where even like, because I've been part of men's groups where, I don't mean to take over, but I'm just trying to empathize here. So I've been a part of men's groups and think out loud a little bit where there's no vulnerability, just virtually none. Because even when there is, there's like immediate correction and
not just
fires
listening.
of hell on your head.
Yeah, I know.
Not directly, but there's a lot of shame thrown around. And maybe even a bit of a superiority complex from somebody who's feeling very exposed or they really don't want it pointed at them.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how our groups that we're a part of if we're willing, can be the most valuable group of friends and men or women we can be a part of, because it shows us our blind spots.
Yeah.
And we're able to live out being vulnerable and really life on life with one another.
Yeah, we were made for community.
We were
formed for community. And I know like one of my blind spots is I isolate. I can be perfectly happy in a room by myself for 7 days. But that's not healthy.
Right. So even because you do strike me as a natural ultra introvert.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Why isn't it healthy?
That's a great question. I can tell you, well, I also suffer from some autoimmune disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that kind of pain and you isolate,
Mm-hmm.
you become very self-focused.
Mm-hmm.
And pity party is really the wrong word, but it's in order for me to get over the hump to be productive, when I isolate, it's significantly harder. And, I have to choose every day to work through the pain in the morning, to stretch through it, to then go on a walk. And I have this routine I have to go through in order to be highly functional
Mm-hmm.
in my day. And if I isolate, the momentum that I have that inertia that I just start focusing in on the pain as opposed to others. But I have good friends, good business partners, good family who, if I start to do that, they're like, hey, Paul, we're doing lunch today. And they force me out of it. And that safety net is crucial. So,
Yeah. Wow. Those are some great friends.
yes. Yeah. I don't have a lot of friends per se. I have a lot of acquaintances, but my close friends are very close.
Yeah. When it's you, I can totally see being alone with your pain. That becomes the focus.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Before my conversion, I was definitely in pity party mode.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Well, okay. So what's the difference between pity party and living with the reality of pain that you need help with?
Well, for me, it was definitely more than pity party. I was suicidal, man.
Mm.
I was like doing these calculations in my head, like I'm worth more dead with my life insurance than alive. These are the kind of things that go through your head back then. And so it was very dangerous for me. Where like I had a defined conversion moment when Christ showed up and said, no, you are my adopted son. And he took all this fear away from me. And it was a pivotal point in my life.
Wow.
And since then, I've been kind of exploring the adventure of what being a disciple really is. I was an intellectual believer for years. Yeah, I'm probably one of the few people convinced by the ontological proof for God existence. It's a pure logic proof. And I saw that in college, and I'm like, yep, I believe in God. It's logical. And I saw no way around the argument. And most people go, oh, that's just a weird argument. I'm like, no. It really spoke to me, oddly enough. Like, I was absolutely convinced. And then, and I am a scientist, but I also know that the scientific method is also logically problematic. So I had done all this intellectual exploration into the faith, but I didn't have it internally. I didn't even realize there was a difference.
Yeah, even the devil knows about God.
Yeah. But it was funny. God, when I had the conversion, I showed up to this program our pastor asked my wife to be a part of, and it ticked me off because I was like, I'm going through this health issue, and you're asking her to go do this and take her away from me and helping me. This is what was going through my head.
Sure.
But I talked to the pastor later. He knew it would tick me off. He also knew it would get me there. So this man has a lot of wisdom, and that began my journey to the Lord.
Wow.
So,
Amazing.
yeah, it was, yeah. And now I help run, I'm a teacher for evangelical evangelization school,
Okay.
where we teach street evangelization and healing ministry and inner healing ministry. So years later.
Wow. I saw somewhere in here or on your profile, there was something about maybe a mental health related, suicide related. Am I making something up?
I don't know if I doubt I put that on there. But
It might have been on your website or on the web page towards the bottom.
yeah, I mean, I speak about suicide stuff.
Yeah.
I speak to teens, and I'm very open with it because you have to be. Somebody has to meet people in the midst of despair. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we had Mary Jones on with MHA. I don't know if it was 1 or 2 episodes ago.
Okay.
And yeah, we talked a little bit about that. But it's so awesome to hear people that have been there and then been found out in their faith journey. And
yeah, I definitely understand the parable of the mustard seed, because that little faith I had when I went into that thing with my wife, God used it. It was little, but God used that and built upon my little, even though it was a gesture of me being ticked off, used that gesture of coming, and it was a program called Discovering Christ, and me journeying through that program, finding out who he really is, what his relationship with him looked like, that little mustard seed, and he just built on that in a major way for me. So.
wow. And not that I see your value as what you have added to society, but was that in your calculation when you were considering suicide at the time of like, man, what do I bring to this world?
Yeah.
It was?
Yeah, I didn't see. I mean, when you're in that level of despair, you're not rational. You can't see the positives. You know, I was just like, you know what? I'm better off dead. It was a mathematical formula in my head, which the input variables to the formula were all wrong, but you couldn't see it. I mean, I had a huge blind spot. So.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad that the blind spot didn't win out.
No, me too. I really enjoy life now. Like, I wake up and life's an adventure. And one of the scariest prayers I think anybody in ministry can pray is like, Lord, I'm ready to, what do you want? What do you want me to do? You know, I came across a woman in an active trafficking situation a couple months ago now and helped her escape from that. That was not on my plan that day, you know?
Wow.
But the Lord put that in my life. And it was emotionally very difficult for me to go through this and to see the horror of that. Because you hear about it, but you never really see it. And I saw it. And like, whoa, okay, now I get it. But that wasn't on my plan that day, but I would change it for the world that we were able to, me and a bunch of the community here was able to help her escape that. And I've had a lot of adventures like that in the last 8 years. So I wouldn't change it for the world. I know I've been, like I tell people, I've been through a lot of ups and downs. I've been really sick. I've been about as low as you can go. My marriage was falling apart, all that at the time. I hurt my kids because I was disconnecting, you know, I was isolating.
Sure, yeah.
But I wouldn't change any of it because it got me to where I am today.
Yeah.
Like, he's the master storyteller. And now I'm just like, I'm so happy to be part of the story.
Well, it sounds weird if I ask the question now, what does living the best life possible with the time you have left look like?
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, you know, I asked the Lord, you know, where do you want me to go? And one of the things we talk about in school, and I found I sound really weird to some people. Like I have a friend from London I was talking to the other day who runs another insurtech. And I was like, she's like, why are you running now? Because I started running, okay?
Oh.
Which seems impossible to somebody with my condition. And I thought so too. I'm like, I think the Lord's telling me to run. She's like, so you're talking to God. And I'm like, you know, I didn't realize how weird that sounded to her. But we are called into relationship, which means it's a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
And because of the noise of the world, we forgot how to listen. Spent a lot of time in the last 8 years learning how to listen. And so my best life is, having eyes to see and ears to hear and listening. And what's kind of cool is I think we misunderstand who the Father is to some extent. We see the Father as he's got this file cabinet, right? What's Paul's next move? Well, let's pull out the file and see. This is my will. Boom. But you're a dad, right? I'm a dad. What do we do with our kids? We're like, what makes you happy? And then if that is moral and good, let me help you do that. Let me help you realize that dream. And we're wired as fathers that way. We want our kids to be happy. We want them to excel and in a good way. And if they're choosing a way that is, moral and ethical and theologically sound, that I might have want my kid to be a programmer. Like one of my kids is a natural programmer. He, with Minecraft, created a neural network to create this game within a game. He didn't know he was doing that.
What?
Yeah. He had, with sluice, like water sluices and stuff. And I looked at what he created to solve this problem. Like, did you realize you've created a neural network that you can train in this game? Like, he is a natural programmer.
Wow.
But he wants to be a psychiatrist, But I've also seen him interact with people and bring incredible perspective. So I'm, okay, how do we help you be a psychiatrist? It's not my dream for him.
Yeah.
But it's a good dream, and he wants to help people, so I'm trying to facilitate that. Am I convinced he'll go back to the programming someday? I bet you he will, because he's so natural at it, and I believe God gifted him that way. But sometimes I think the answer to our question to God, what is your will for me? He's going to say, well, what do you want to do?
All right. So this is a little bit related. I have, so part of the perspective I take is none of our lives are quote unquote perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that's by design.
Yeah.
So in my upbringing, there were things that happened where I went into emotional shutdown. And then from the awkwardness of high school, even though I was kind of like not quite a teacher's pet, but certainly might fit the part in different ways, to figuring out, how do I relate to people? And in college, I know I was kind of a bull in a china closet socially. And then getting into the professional world, oh, okay, well, I got to connect with people. And then I've gone on this journey of learning, okay, how do I speak the language of body language? I didn't speak that. I didn't even know I didn't speak that until somehow they got in front of me.
Sure.
And then how do I learn about this and like different personality frameworks or filters or, all these different things you can learn about personality. How do I do that? And then eventually there was a breakthrough that I had on a retreat. I've had David Case on here and actually Eric Melgren. They were one of our first couple guests together. They've been friends, like best friends for over 30 years. And they were both on that retreat, but I had this breakthrough of like something in my brain, like kind of like clicked or reconnected. And it was just like this flood of emotional awareness. And and so there was like this huge breakthrough after these years of studying. How do I get here?
Sure.
Cognitively. And then something clicked. And then so that plus, the studies since then, and also just kind of intentional relationship has really helped me. But it's like, okay, God gives us a thorn for a reason.
Yeah.
And so whether it's your son's desire to understand how people create or interact in their neural network for themselves, and then later come back and do some programming, which is kind of in your wheelhouse for both of those pieces.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think one of the big lies sold is that pain is always bad out there, that crosses are bad. Scripture says, take up your cross. It doesn't say, deal with your cross. It doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry you have the cross. It says, take it up.
Yeah.
That change in perspective, that was my click. Take it up. We have a God who took it up before and can help us with it and transform us into something that we would have never got there, like you said, without the thorn, without the cross.
Getting back to the dignity of work.
That's right. That's right.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a really great landing point for the podcast.
Sounds great.
So we started with AI and we landed on the dignity of work.
Perfect.
Is that counterintuitive?
No, I think that's perfect.
Okay. Well, Paul, Dr. Paul, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy and purposeful day to spend some time playing with us on the podcast with thoughts and ideas and vast levels of background of wisdom and knowledge.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Likewise. So I'll go ahead and sign off. This has been Dr. Paul Peloquin with ThumbScore and your host, Michael Proctor, financial advisor, president, Leading Edge Financial Planning, here on Real Wealth Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
There you go.
I'm not good at saying that, so just do it. I don't want to have to keep saying it. Thanks.